alaikum once again.
So for this brief Q&A session, we thought we'd keep it much more conversational, much more lighthearted in tone. I've asked for the team to collect the questions and bring them up. We fielded some questions from the live stream as well. For the most part, I'm going to be addressing those questions. I'm going to have Mehdi address those questions. He might not look it, but he's actually quite intelligent and he knows his stuff. I can say that because I'm his brother. You can't make fun of him, that'd be rude, quite frankly. And so we're just going to, there are a couple questions that I've already seen on that were mentioned that we can start with. We can start with a very basic one that someone asked, which was, how can such a young person, how was it that a young person like Imam Mahdi, when he was tasked with imamate, how did it come to be that he was given this role? How could something, especially not just imamate, but as well, how could the role of al-Mahdi be given to such a young person? So, without further ado, if you don't mind taking that first one.
Thank you, Imam. My apologies to others. It doesn't look like the recorder is working, so we'll go. It's not recording today. How can such a young individual be given the role of imamate? So the role of imamate is not one that he had to work for. What I mean by that is, as Zach was listening to your bio, you got your bachelor's degrees somehow. You got, no, I didn't mean it like that. You got your master's degree, you're working on your PhD because you have an end goal. To be an academic, you need to grow within that realm. You need to learn, you need to wrestle with the academic literature, with the methodology to be said profession, to have that job. God-given responsibilities don't have that same trajectory. God-given responsibilities, the responsibility and the ability to do it is what we call wahdi, which is something that's given directly by God. It can happen in an instant, and we see that's happened before. As the Quran mentions two particular cases. One is the prophet Yahya, peace be upon him, that Allah says that we gave him this role of prophethood even though he was nothing more than a sabi, meaning the word for someone who's a child who's right around the age of 6, 7, no longer a toddler, but not quite, just that beginning elementary school age level in our common day parlance. For Isa, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, he's still in the pram, in this day it would have been a car seat, but he's still an infant, a newborn. And Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, says, Atani al-kitab. He has, Allah in the past tense he's speaking, has given me a book and has made me a prophet.
Thank you. By the way, there might be a point where, at any point, if any of you would like to answer, because I get tired of his voice personally, if any of you would like to answer, just raise your hand, and I have good peripheral vision, so I'll catch it, hopefully. So this is very interesting. I just got a text with a question. So that sort of kills the anonymity that we had you guys pass out papers. And also that's weird that we're sort of moving into text and live streams, and I don't know, I guess we need a hashtag now that we can bring Imam Mahdi back or something. Hashtag bring him. I don't know if we want to go that far. But this next question was, how is he alive after 1,000 years? So I'll field this one if that's okay, and sort of piggyback on what you were saying. One of the things that we sometimes seem to overlook is the fact that Imam Mahdi ﷺ is a culmination of a number of attributes that we have seen in previous prophets. So, for example, Mahdi mentioned the Prophet Yahya, he mentioned the Prophet Isa, alayhi salatu wassalam. We see, for instance, other aspects, primarily the question of longevity. How could it be that someone, not only at such a young age, but could be around for so long? The parallels that we see there as well, we don't want to go with the easy answer of like, oh, God wants to do it, and God will do it, even though it's a great answer. It's a great answer. It's gotten me out of a lot of minds. But as well, I think when we look to see in our Islamic tradition, and Nabi Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, we have these very fascinating traditions. I remember when I was, I think maybe 12 or 13, I stumbled upon one of them, and I was just so fascinated because I just loved the ark story, that we have a hadith from Imam Jafar that says, before Noah even embarked on the ark, that he was a prophet for some almost 1,000 years. There was a 500-year period upon which, after the ark, the issue of the ark and the ark landed, he's still a prophet for some 500 years. There's a sort of, I don't recall the source, but there's sort of this, I don't know if it's a proper hadith or if it's just anecdotal, but it's sort of tongue-in-cheek and makes me smile, is that when the angel of death finally came to take the prophet's life, he comes and said, yeah, Prophet Noah's life, thank you. He comes and says, you know, you've had a great life, you've lived for some 2,000 years or so, it's time for you, if you give me permission, to take your soul to the next. And the prophet is sitting there, and behind him there's this like mud hut that he's like slapped together, and he looks at him and says, if I knew that life was this short, I wouldn't have even built that mud hut. And I think that's an interesting take, but there it is, that we have examples. For me, foremost, what I think of is Nabi Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, that we see that if Allah has a mission for someone designated, then it's not out of this realm to have them, to give them, to grant them an elongated life.
Yes.
Thank you. There's such good chemistry. All right, so here's a question. Since they, I think means the Imams, since the Imams are the Holy Prophet's inheritors, why did the Imams become increasingly marginalized in terms of political power? Was their successorship, I cannot read, was their successorship of the Prophet not all-encompassing? That's an excellent question, and one that's broader than just Imam Mahdi. In other words, the question really comes down to why aren't they ruling? Why haven't the Imams ruled in the past? It's not one, if you don't mind, I'll start, and then you could chip in afterwards if you'd like. I think at the heart of this, we call ourselves Shia, we call ourselves Shia Ali. I think there was one mention that we had of Imam Ali alayhi salam. For such a magnanimous event and such a magnanimous figure, we ought to bring his name up some more. And I think he is emblematic of the relationship that the Imams and really Awliya Allah have had towards power, towards politics, this ubiquitous category. And if I may bring this story in, it's a story from the Nahj al-Balagha, where Ibn Abbas, who we all know, comes to Imam Ali, and Imam Ali at this point is the caliph, and he is on the outskirts of Basra. And Ibn Abbas comes to him and says, Ya Ali, like, I want you to advise us that we are sort of like gathered here, your followers are gathered here. This was sort of on the eve of the Battle of the Camel, Waqat al-Jamal, and Ibn Abbas says, please, give us something. And Imam Ali looks at him and says, he like picks up he's got this pair of tattered sandals on, and he's mending them. And as Ibn Abbas asks him, he picks it up and he says, you know, what is the bayna? What is the price that you would say, Ya Ibn Abbas? Like, what was the price that you would give these tattered sandals? And Ibn Abbas says, you know, there's no value to this. There's nothing, you know, they're just tattered sandals. And Imam Ali responds by saying, these sandals have the same value to me as your rulership. In this sense, he means political rulership. And he continues, if it wasn't for the moral imperative, if it wasn't for the religious obligation that is upon me to rectify the wrong, enjoin the good, and things of that nature, I would have no role, I wouldn't have any of this. Elsewhere we have different points at which multiple Imams have said, had it not been for the demand of the people to get us here, we would not do this. So I think the question of why aren't they politically ruling is an excellent one, but it's also, it's furthest from what we see in the tradition of the A'immah. They weren't after political rule. And in fact, one of the most interesting things for me is, immediately after the Prophet's death, the Muslim Ummah is distracted by these Ridda wars that take place and they go campaigning. And the Islamic empire starts expanding. The only time where empire, that thing that we think is good until we hit like the 8th grade and we realize, oh, it's not that good and people die. The thing about empire is that this Islamic empire is just expanding up until the caliphate of Imam Ali, and it shrinks significantly. Why? Not because Imam Ali wasn't a capable commander or able commander, because that's not the point of it all. The point isn't monetary wealth, the point isn't gains, the point isn't land. The point is the moral rectification of us as Muslims. And so, to the question of why didn't they have political rule, again, it's that wasn't the message of the Prophet. The Prophet had a unique capability of having political rule as well in Medina, but that wasn't even the entirety of his life. He went through years of persecution. We'll see political rule at some point after the return of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. But that they have this relatively downtrodden position is not something that we should look at as, oh, that's, if only they rule. It's not, it doesn't quite work out that way.
I would love to piggyback on what you said. The question also assumes that it was necessarily God that took if I understood the question correctly, it was necessarily God that took this leadership away from the Imam. There is, of course, the issue of responsibility. Each of the Imams, each of the members of the Ahlul Bayt had different responsibilities throughout their times. So Imam Hassan made peace with Muawiyah. Granted, Muawiyah turned his back on that. For 6 months, when Imam Hussein was the Imam, he also kept the peace with Muawiyah. Yazid comes about, and just like that, war breaks out. Any other of the Imams under those same circumstances would have done what Imam Hussein was charged to do, because he's charged to do so on behalf of God. In his circumstances, Imam Sajjad then turns around and brings people back to prayer, reminds people about the importance of prayer and about spirituality. So you see throughout their lives, كُلُّهُمْ نُورٌ وَاحِدٌ, they are all one light. But throughout their lives, the circumstances were different, so they each acted differently, with some exception. Because, of course, Imam Ali's position as the first Imam was much different. Immediately following the Prophet was much different. Imam Mahdi's responsibility as the savior, when someone comes to Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam and says, "Are you the Mahdi?" He says, "Kulluna Mahdi." We are all rightly guided, which is the definition of the word. But I'm not that one that you're talking about. Imam Mahdi's particular responsibility of reappearance and dhuhur and faraj that comes with it, that's particular to Imam Mahdi. In fact, that's one of the things that's cited it's referenced in one of the hadith that talks about the superiority of Imam Mahdi over some of the other Imams. I mean, we mentioned Imam Sadiq calls Imam Mahdi his own descendant, Sayyidi, my master. I think part of the answer, though, other than the issue of circumstances, the answer when Hazrat Zahra alayhi salam, peace be upon her, and Imam Ali are approached to say, okay, if power was taken away from you, why don't you rise up and fight for it? Imam Ali says, La ra'ya liman la yuta. I don't have a say because they don't listen to me. And if they don't, I'm not going to fight for it and bring down the civilization of Islam, bring down into the depths of battle and war that which the Prophet worked so hard to achieve. And instead, in his circumstances, for 25 years, he kept quiet, did what he did. He spoke. He was outspoken in the sense that he let everyone know, I should be given governance and power the same way Allah has given me wilaya, the religious authority. But, as Hazrat Zahra tells us, مَثَلُهُ, the issue of the Imam, the case of the Imam, كَمَثَلِ الْكَعْبَةِ, it's like the Kaaba. The Kaaba doesn't come to you, it doesn't grow legs and walk over to you. You have to work your way to the Kaaba so that you can circulate that site. People have to go to the Imam. And if people don't go to the Imam's responsibility over political leadership goes away. And that only comes when people are willingly giving it to the Imam, like Imam Ali did, as you mentioned. And there was the moral imperative that people brought up to Imam Ali. With the exception of Imam Mahdi, who has the authority and the divine responsibility to then take governance and bring it into the realm of governance.
So this next question, two different people asked sort of the similar question. and I'm going to pose this to you guys now. Why isn't Imam Mahdi mentioned in the Quran?
Like everyone suddenly becomes so interested in each other.
No, I think what's most fascinating is usually when I ask a question to an audience, because I've recently started TA. So when if I ask students a question, they all go like this. They all go like this. They all look. But you are all such confident and like audacious humans that you're just like, yeah, what? so it's nice. I like it. Yes, please. So the answer was, for those of you that didn't hear, he is mentioned in the Quran. So how can I? All right, so Mehdi, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my brother's microphone, which is like...
You can consult me on this decision.
And if you don't mind, if you could go around if anyone has a question, just tag me with the mic.
Thank you, Mehdi.
Sorry, can you go ahead and repeat? You mentioned he is mentioned in the Quran. Can you take it one step further?
He is mentioned in the Quran.
So where, if you mention, if you say that he is mentioned in the Quran, where in the Quran?
Everywhere.
Nice. All right, so thank you very much for that. We're on the right track. He is mentioned in the Quran. Anyone wanna help out from there? Maybe a specific verse that you might know. Maybe a certain concept that you might know that appears in the Quran.
Maybe a specific verse that opened up our program with tonight.
Okay, so in the interest of time, because I'm being paid hourly, so in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and address this as the beginning of the program. For those of us that were present, there were a medley of verses that were mentioned. And among these were all relevant to Imam Mahdi. So, to answer this question briefly, and I want to address it as well. The first way that, why isn't he mentioned in the Quran? There's a way that this question is correct and incorrect. Correct in the fact that explicitly the name Imam al-Mahdi does not appear in the Quran. So the question is valid on that front. But as our young brother mentioned, he is mentioned in the Quran in the similar way in which many concepts of the Quran come out, namely in tafsir, namely in allegory, namely in metaphor, and things of that nature. So two of the verses that were among those that we discussed at the beginning, which were recited, were from Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah 5, Surah Al-Qasas, ayah 5, that mention of the inheritor of the earth. Almost unanimously, across the tafsir tradition in Islam is one of the most beautiful things that we have, and it's very fecund and it's very storied. And one of the things that we see is almost unanimously among different schools of tafsir, be they Sunni, Shi'i, Sufi, whatever, and all the ways in which these tafsir blend with one another, that the inheritors of the earth are mentioned to be Imam al-Mahdi specifically. The other thing that, one of the verses that we didn't mention that I particularly like in its metaphor is in a tafsir by Imam Jafar al-Sadiq on the surah of Surah Al-Shams. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها. It says about these three verses, that Shams, which means sun, that sun that comes in its brightness was Rasulullah. The Qamar, the moon that follows it, that's Imam Ali alayhi salam. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, that jallaha refers to the thing that makes brighter. That nur of the sun, the ha refers to the shams there. That thing which makes brighter, that light of the sun, that's Imam Mahdi alayhi salam.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Zain, Brother Zain, you did a wonderful job in answering the question correctly. He was mentioned in the Quran. I want to ask you a question, and we'll say the answer together, okay? Who is the most important prophet of all? Of all of God's prophets, who was the most important one? Do you have the answer in mind? Yeah? Let's say it together. 1, 2, 3. Prophet Moses. Thank you, Zain. You're absolutely right. Prophet Moses, however, is mentioned by name more in the Quran than anyone else. Yet Zayn says, no, Prophet Muhammad is the most important prophet. And you're absolutely right. And the mentioning of the particular person by name. Now, Prophet Moses is mentioned by name, of course, is an indication of how important he is, but not so much so that others are not as important. It's the content of those ayat that mention Imam Mahdi that are so important. It's the content and the way that Allah, through means other than by mentioning him by name, talks about Imam Mahdi. We get that from the tafsir, which Mahmood so well delineated and elucidated for us.
Thank you. So there were two more questions, but we're running out of time, and I'm hungry. I don't know about you guys. So, and there's a raffle, and I want to see if I can win that Kindle. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up. For those of you that there have been multiple ways in which you can contact Oasis. Just because the question wasn't addressed here, my apologies. I have a problem with speaking too much. And so you can address your question via email. Afterwards, I'm more than happy to, either of us would be more than happy to discuss the question in person if you, and we'll hopefully address these questions in future programs.
Thank you, Matt.
Answer